So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening. I know folks are logging in from many different places, even though we're really talking about loan forgiveness focused on opportunities in New York. My name is Rich Limesider, and I am really thrilled to have the chance to talk to you today all about how this new public service loan forgiveness waiver might mean that your own loans can be forgiven, as mine were just a few weeks ago, and also that many of your colleagues might have the same opportunity. I've really just got two goals for today. It's pretty straightforward. Number one, we want to start with the basics of helping you get your own loans forgiven. Thanks for those who typed into the chat. It looks like many of those who are on the call today do have your own student loans. I've spoken to folks over the past few weeks who have loan amounts ranging from $15,000 to $300,000 in student loans. It's a big deal. So we're going to try to get you some information just over the next hour or so to help you get your own loans forgiven. And then so many of you are in leadership positions in nonprofit, in government, you're in HR roles. We're going to share some best practices for how to help your colleagues and your staff get their own loans forgiven as well. So I am working on behalf of what we're calling the PSLF New York City campaign. And this is a nonprofit effort housed now within the Robin Hood Foundation. And it's a coalition of nonprofits, of unions, of government agencies. And we have a simple but pretty big goal. We want to make sure that 250,000 New Yorkers, all of whom are eligible right now, as many of you are, for loan forgiveness because they are public service workers, nonprofit or government, who have federal loans. We want to make sure all 250,000 of those New Yorkers find out about this program and get their piece of $10 billion in loan forgiveness just for New York City. It's a huge opportunity, and you are now a part of the work to get the word out. So thank you so much for joining. Quickly about me, my name is Rich Limesider. If there was a drink, it would be lime cider. I've pretty much only worked for government and nonprofit organizations. Most recently, I was the executive director of an immigration services organization called Safe Passage Project. So a really terrific place that provides free lawyers for about 1,400 children who are actively being deported. And over my life, I have benefited from some really terrific but very expensive higher education. And amazingly to me, 6 weeks ago, all of my loans were forgiven. I had known about this program. It's existed for a while. It never worked for me. It never worked for lots of folks. But in May, I logged on and my student loans were listed as $0. If you want to learn more about me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Today, we're going to go through a couple of key issues. I'm going to briefly tell you about this PSLF waiver. I will show you very specifically how to apply. I'll even share screenshots from my own loan account so you can see what I went through myself. And then we're going to talk about specific best practices for how to help your employees, your colleagues, or friends and neighbors, if that's where we can spread the word. And we'll do an open Q&A towards the back half of the hour. Public service loan forgiveness. Congress passed a law in 2007, and it had great intentions. The idea was any nonprofit or government worker who had done 10 years of service, by the way, it never had to be contiguous. It was always possible to work 2 years here, 3 years there, take a year in the private sector, come back. After 10 years of service, all your remaining federal student loans were meant to be forgiven. The way the government has always talked about this is as 120 qualifying periods or qualifying payments. It's 10 years times 12 months. But the law was written so narrowly that between 2007 and 2021, only 16,000 people had ever benefited from it, had ever gotten their loans forgiven. And we know that there were at least 15 million Americans who should have qualified. Last year, because the COVID crisis was declared a national emergency, the Department of Education was able to push aside almost all of the worst rules that applied to the public service loan forgiveness program. So that's what the waiver is. You don't have to apply for a waiver. It's not that you have to get a certain piece of paper. The waiver already exists. And the waiver fixed almost everything that was bad about the old version. More student loan types are now eligible if they are properly consolidated, and we'll talk about that, but more student loan types are eligible for loan forgiveness. Most significantly, certainly in my case, retroactive credit can be given. So the worst thing to my mind about the old version of the program was that if you didn't have all your paperwork lined up exactly right, you got no credits for the work you had done. I actually applied for the loan forgiveness program in 2018. I'd known about it, I'd heard about it, like so many others. I submitted my paperwork. They told me I hadn't checked a box properly back in 2007, and so they gave me 0 credits. They told me in 2018, too bad, you're at 0. You have to do 10 more years of service before we'll consider forgiving your loans. Come back in the year 2028. Well, under this waiver, they went back, they looked over my prior years, and they were able to give credit for all of those old periods. They actually will even give credit if you were in deferral, if you paid less than you were supposed to in a given month. During this waiver, they're being extremely flexible and open-minded about giving you credits towards your 120. And in some cases, if they determine that you actually made more than 120 payments using their new rules, they will pay you back. In my case, the government figured out I had made 134 payments, more than the 120 required. They put money right back into my bank account. I was doing direct deposit for student loans. They popped it right back to me. The big catch is that this waiver expires October 31st. So getting the basic paperwork, letting the government know that you need your loan forgiveness recalculated, that you need them to either look again if you've tried in the past, or look at your years of service for the first time, the paperwork has to be in by October 31st. So if you, like me, knew about the program, knew it was a stinker and were rejected in the past, go ahead and try again. If you had heard about it but didn't think you qualified for any one of a dozen reasons, now might be the time. And certainly if you're close to 10 years of payments while in public service, now is definitely the time to go for it. But one of the most important things that I can communicate to you all today, and for you all to communicate with colleagues and staff, is that even if our colleagues don't have 10 years of service, now is the time to submit the paperwork. If we have a colleague who has been working for 4 years for nonprofits or government, if they haven't previously gotten everything exactly right under the old version, if they don't apply for the PSLF program until November 1st, until the day after the waiver ends, they, like I was, will be set back to 0. So even folks who have fewer than 10 years need to get their paperwork in now. We want everyone with 2 years, with 4 years, with 6 years to get credit for all of those years of service during the waiver period. Otherwise, starting November 1st, everyone gets set back to 0. So the truth is, that's it. When I'm talking just to borrowers and not to organizational leaders or folks in HR, what I tell them is, we can spend the next 10 or 15 minutes and I will show you how exactly I applied for loan forgiveness, and you are welcome to stick around with me on the call. But if you're ready, log off now. Get off this webinar. Go to this website right now. It's very straightforward. studentaid.gov/PSLF. The government offers what they call their help tool. And we just need to get the word out that every single person with student loans needs to visit this website and complete the help tool and go from there. But like I said, we're going to go through in greater detail how exactly it all works. And then again, we're going to talk about how you can help your colleagues by making a commitment to getting everybody aware and have access to the program. So as you go through it, there are in fact 4 milestones. The first issue is that it is necessary to have what the government calls a direct type federal loan. There are many different kinds of federal student loans. Only some of them are known as direct loans. The good news is that there's a process called loan consolidation where you can convert one type of loan to another. And during this period of the waiver, if you consolidate one of several other kinds of loans into what is known as a direct consolidation loan, the government will give you credit for all of those old payments under the old payment types. Again, if you wait till November 1st, that won't be the case. So if you had a different sort of loan and you wait till November 1st, the government starts you at zero. If you consolidate now and get your paperwork in now, you will get credit for all your years of service, even though you had, from the government's perspective, the wrong loan type. You will have to get a one-page employer certification form signed by every employer you have had who is in public service, every government agency or nonprofit that you have worked for since 2007, as long as you have been in repayment on your loans. So if you finished school and started in repayment status in 2002, in 2006, in 2007, you're going to need a one-page form signed by every employer you've had since then. If you didn't finish school until 2016, and you haven't had student loans prior to 2016, even if you worked for an employer before that, you don't need to get the signatures from those employers. And then you're going to need to submit the one-page application form by October 31st. That's it. It's pretty straightforward. There absolutely may be need for you to follow up to correct errors if the government processes your loan incorrectly, but they have a great appeals process. There's an ombuds. All of that can take time. The most important thing is that you get your papers in by October 31st, and that we help our colleagues do the same. So here's the help tool that I've been telling you about, studentaid.gov/PSLF. They actually built a pretty good website. They are doing a good job about talking about the waiver opportunity right at the top. If you want, or if your colleagues really want to, I don't know if you can see the language at the bottom, there's even a how to use the help tool guide, which is pretty good. Not necessary in my view, but not badly done. Folks will need to have a login and a password for this studentaid.gov website. Many already do from FAFSA or other things, but if they don't, it's just like creating any other online account. You log in and you use the help tool. And here's the help tool itself. One of the reasons why the message to our colleagues and to each other can be so straightforward is all of the really nitty-gritty information that's required for this application is already held by the government. You don't have to find any old paperwork. You don't have to know even how much debt you have or what type of loan you have, because the government has all that information in their database on this website. That's why we can tell our colleagues just to come here. We don't have to tell them that they have to know anything complicated or bring anything complicated. It's all about coming to this website. The first thing they'll ask you to do is to type in information about all the employers that you have had that you think help you qualify for this program. You're going to need to type in the employer tax ID. So certainly for those of us in organization leadership and HR, one of the things we can do for our colleagues is making sure they know what our tax ID is. But even if it's not easily available from your employer, these things are actually pretty easy to Google. You can Google tax ID. It's usually found on the donation page. It's not hard to find the tax ID. If anyone from your employer has already applied for this program, the Department of Ed will already have on their list, oh, you're working in an organization that we already know is a qualified nonprofit. This process is going to go fast. If you're the first person to apply from your organization, it might take a little longer. You're going to have to say, yes, we're a nonprofit, and it may take them a month or two to check the box in agreement with you, but it's still the same process moving forward. As I mentioned earlier, not everyone already has the correct loan type. So when you go through this help tool, and the help tool really shouldn't take more than 30 minutes, for some of us, we get a little message that says, you may be eligible for public service loan forgiveness, but you don't have the right loan type. We recommend that you consolidate your loans, which essentially means smushing together several loans that you may have and turning them into the proper loan type. That consolidation process itself, again, takes 20 minutes because the government already has all of your ID and information. You don't need to go to your loan servicer, the place you send your money. It can all be done from right here. There are situations where consolidating your loans is a little bit more complicated. For example, if you have loans, if you have parent loans that you took out for a child, as well as your own student loans, you may want to get some one-on-one advice. And I'll talk about how to get that advice before you go and do consolidation. If you have some sort of special situation with your own grad school or some other program you're affiliated with, where you need to stay in the loan type you have, that doesn't apply to most people. It didn't apply to me. But if you have something special going on, you may need to think twice before you consolidate. But most folks can move forward directly with consolidating if that's what's recommended here by the government. Here's the form itself that I was talking about. It's very straightforward. This is the top half of the one-page application form. It's name, address, and a checkbox that says either, I think I'm at 10 years, I believe I qualify right now, or I just want to find out how many qualifying payments I've made. That's the box you check if you have fewer than 10 years, but you want to get into the system during the waiver. Here's the bottom of that page. It's just a signature. Want to highlight in red that the government hasn't gotten around to updating all of the various web pages and forms to reflect everything that's great about this waiver. So for example, it still says on the form, I realize that I have to be employed full-time by a qualifying employer when I apply. That's actually not true. It says very plainly in the frequently asked questions page about the waiver that you could actually be unemployed. You could be working in the private sector at this moment, as long as you can demonstrate 10 years of service when you're applying for loan forgiveness. So this is just an example of how, even though they haven't gotten around to changing the form, we can sort of still move forward, sign things and get them in by the 31st to make sure we get our loans forgiven. So that's it. That's the one-page application. Appended to the application, you need this page for each employer. And again, as employers, what we can do is pre-fill most of this for our employees. Pretty straightforward. Employer name, tax ID, address, the start date and end date that the employee worked there, and then a checkbox with both hours per week and whether that is verified as full-time. The government requires that this be a full-time job to qualify for loan forgiveness. However, they have said explicitly full-time can be defined by the employer. So for example, for public school teachers who may or may not always get to exactly 30 hours or may not work over the summers, it's perfectly fine for a Department of Education to certify, yes, this teacher is a full-time employee, even though they may be working 29 hours a week and only 10 months a year. As long as the employer certifies that it's full-time, that counts as full-time. They ask you to check a box whether it's a governmental or nonprofit, and then a quote official of the employer needs to sign. And again, it's up to the employer to decide who is authorized to sign this form. It can be HR, it can be the executive director in a small nonprofit, it can be a supervisor if the organization determines that a supervisor is authorized to sign the form. We're working with some truly large employers, right? We believe, on behalf of the campaign, we believe that 100,000 New Yorkers are currently employed by the city of New York and eligible for this. Well, it's not entirely clear that the personnel office at the city wants to get 100,000 requests to have the form filled out. So we're working with the city to see whether individual supervisors or agency heads can actually fill out the form. Here's my personal inbox from my loan website, just to show you exactly how the process worked for me. So again, I'm the kind of nerd who knew about this program for a long time. I wasn't particularly optimistic about it, but when I heard there was a waiver, I immediately got my paperwork updated last November. I didn't think it was going to really happen, but I said, sure, I better get it in there. I got it in there for me. I had my sister upload her paperwork. I had my wife do the same thing. We're all in public service. Back in November, it was so early to have applied that if you can read the small writing on the screen, I submitted the application. They did a good job at alerting me that they had received it, which they've continued to be fairly timely in that. And within 3 weeks, they gave me my results, which was that I was rejected. And they were kind enough to reject me 3 times in a row. But I knew that they were getting their own ducks in a row internally. They were still figuring out how to process this waiver. So I actually never called customer service. I never worried about it. I never called the 800 number. I just waited. In March 17th, they sent me an update note saying, oh, okay, now we think you have 60 credits towards the 120 you need. Again, I knew that was wrong. I knew I had more than 10 years. I figured they were going through and checking off each of my employers one at a time because I knew I had several different employers to add up to my 10 years. I waited. A month later, they told me I had 90 credits. And on May 11th, they reached out to notify me that, in fact, they'd gotten through all of my papers. All of my loans were forgiven, May 11th. I went online back to studentaid.gov, and this is what I see right now. This is my actual login page. My loan balance is 0. It's a pretty incredible thing and an amazing feeling. My sister had the exact same experience. Her loan balance is 0, and we expect my wife's loans to be forgiven in the next month or so. A couple of notes. The process is straightforward. It's bureaucratic. It's definitely slow, but it does go A to B to C to D. If you use that help tool, the government explains how to move forward through it all. As I said, not every one of the forms and web pages reflects the waiver. So even if you're sort of Googling, if you Google PSLF right now, all you're going to see is news articles and letters about what a terrible program this is. If you Google PSLF waiver, or if you're looking even on the government's website for pages that say waiver, you get all the updated information about this miracle year that we're in the middle of. There is, in fact, one-on-one guidance and counseling available to folks who really get stuck. If you have that parent loan consolidation issue, if you are currently in default on your student loans, there's a terrific organization in New York called EdCap. The website is edcapnewyork.org. It has a state contract to do one-on-one counseling. They have an email inbox that they're pretty responsive with. They have an 800 number, and they'll even set up for one-on-one conversations with individuals who want to learn more. It's not an introductory conversation. This is really for people who get stuck or have sort of some kind of unusual issue with their loan forgiveness situation. I can't emphasize enough, it's important to work quickly to go through that help tool, consolidate if that's what they recommend, and get the employer certifications. If you have an old employer, it might take a few weeks of back and forth to explain to them what you need, why they need to sign, for example, the government's version of the employer form. Sometimes if there's an employer who doesn't know what we're talking about, they like to send you their automated verification of dates, and then you have to go back and say, nope, can't use this. The feds need their form. Can I please get an ink signature on this? So that can take a little while. We want to get going immediately. We want to help our colleagues get going immediately on those parts, and then uploading or submitting that application form we just looked at. But after that, it's kind of up to you. If you're the sort of person who wants to check in and wait on hold and ask the customer service folks, they are pretty knowledgeable. You can certainly feel free to call in and find out what's going on with your account. But it's also fine to just wait a month or 2 months at a time and let them slowly work through the process. As I said, in the first 14 years of this program, only 16,000 people had ever been approved. In the past 8 months, 140,000 people have been approved in the United States for over $8 billion worth of loan forgiveness. And that's incredible, but it's still likely less than 5% of who's actually eligible for loan forgiveness in this country. So we think only 2% of New Yorkers have actually gotten the loan forgiveness they deserve. There's billions and billions of dollars left for us to access. 2 goals: get your loans forgiven, get to that website. And now let's talk specifically about how we as organization leaders, HR professionals, and others can support our colleagues. So the biggest obstacle to success is that for 15 years, this program was a stinker. They either didn't tell enough people about it, either nobody knew, or I've discovered that it's actually much harder to have the conversation with people who did know about the program. because they knew that it didn't work for so long. It's been harder to convince people to give it a second shot. And frankly, sending out a message that says all your loans can be forgiven, or there's $10 billion available just in New York City, it sounds like spam. So the most important thing is to communicate through what the campaign calls credible messengers. That's the same way, we engage with young people. A lot of our organizations do this work with all kinds of messaging. They need to hear it from people they trust. So for those of you in organizational leadership, you are absolutely the best credible messenger that we have to let your staff know that the PSLF waiver, this magical year, it's real, it's important, and unfortunately, it's urgent. Awareness. We're going to share sample messages. We're going to share slides, videos. I'll send you some basic stuff immediately after this conversation in the next couple of days. Our website will be launched within the next 10 days, and then we'll really have a more comprehensive place to point people, as well as social media accounts. But the best practice is to send a dedicated message to all staff monthly between now and October. We all know that we have great newsletters for staff, and we include items, that are $10 off for a gym membership or at Chipotle. We're talking about $40,000, $100,000 in loan forgiveness for our employees. It's definitely worth a dedicated email. And so we're asking folks to do it once per month, a dedicated email, simply letting people know that this is real and they can get to that website. It would be wonderful to raise the topic during some live staff meetings over the next couple of months. You can certainly invite me and our colleagues to come and do a presentation, especially for larger organizations. That's going to be possible. And if you let me know that you're committed to doing this, we would love to feature your organization as a leadership partner to the campaign. And I will say one of the key things is organization leadership. You all do not have to become experts. We are not asking or even recommending that inside your organization, you become able to answer all of these specialized questions. There are folks, there are loan forgiveness experts who are able to do all that. The message is simple. This is a real thing. Get to that studentaid.gov website. That's really the only thing we need to share. And then as employers, in terms of access, by far the best practice is to pre-fill that form and deliver it to every employee on staff. So sending out a survey, trying to track the results of that survey, hoping people have time to fill it out. Do you have student debt? Do you want this form filled out? It actually winds up being more work even for the HR team than simply getting the form, filling it out for everyone on staff, and putting it in their inbox. It's a PDF. It's fillable. You can download the PDF, and I will send this to everybody. You can fill it in. 90% of it is the same for every employee. It's the name of the organization, the address, the EIN, and then just going through over a period of weeks to fill it out and sign it for every single employee and putting it in their inbox will jumpstart for those employees who really do have student debt. And for those who don't, there's no secret or confidential information in there. You've basically just sent people a piece of paper that has the start date and end date of their, or even just the start date to current of their employment days. For organizations that are able to actually offer hours of PTO, that's clearly another best practice to get the paperwork done. This is a massive employee benefit. For you to be able to help employees get tens of thousands of dollars forgiven, we think our colleagues are going to be tremendously grateful. And so, a few hours of PTO to help them get there is a great way to move them along. So that's it. That's it for me and the presentation. In a minute, I'll stop the recording and we'll open it up for Q&A.